The heat shimmered off the dusty main street of Snake River, Wyoming Territory, as Lillian Blackett stepped out of the stagecoach, her hands trembling despite her determination to show strength. It was 1876, and the world was still raw with possibility and danger in equal measure. The journey from Boston had been long, every mile taking her farther from the life she once knew and closer to an uncertain future. A future that now stood before her in the form of a ramshackle schoolhouse at the far end of town. Miss Blackett, I presume. A portly man with a sweating brow and ill-fitting suit extended his hand. Mayor Thomas Finch, we've been anxiously awaiting your arrival. Lillian nodded, brushing the dust from her navy traveling dress. Yes, sir. I'm pleased to finally reach Snake River. Well, I wouldn't say pleased too loudly around here, the mayor chuckled nervously. We're a simple mining town with simple pleasures, nothing like Boston, I imagine. Lillian's eyes swept over the weathered wooden buildings lining the street. Men in dusty clothes loitered outside the saloon, their gazes following her with undisguised curiosity. Women with stern faces peered from shop doorways. Children darted between horses and wagons, their laughter a stark contrast to the town's somber mood. I didn't come expecting Boston, Mayor Finch, she replied, lifting her chin. I came to teach. The mayor's smile faltered. Of course, of course. Now, about your accommodations, a commotion down the street interrupted him. A horse came galloping into town, its rider sitting tall and straight in the saddle. Even from a distance, Lillian could see the man commanded a certain presence. His broad shoulders were draped in a worn leather duster, and a hat pulled low shadowed his face. The horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, came to a stop several yards away. Ah, the mayor said, his voice dropping. That would be Wade Quincy. The rancher, Lillian asked, remembering the correspondence that had mentioned the Q Ranch as the largest employer in the area. Among other things, Mayor Finch said cryptically. He's a complicated man with a complicated past. Best to keep your distance, Miss Blackett. A Boston lady such as yourself wouldn't understand his kind. The rider dismounted with fluid grace, tethering his horse to a post outside the general store. When he turned, Lillian caught her first clear glimpse of his face. Hard lines carved by sun and hardship, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, and eyes the color of a storm-laden sky that somehow found hers across the distance. For a brief moment, something passed between them, recognition without knowledge, a current of awareness that made her breath catch. The mayor cleared his throat. Come along, Miss Blackett. Mrs. Peterson has a room prepared for you at the boarding house. School begins in 2 days, and there's much to discuss about your duties. Lillian reluctantly broke the stranger's gaze and followed Mayor Finch, acutely aware of the curious eyes tracking her progress down the street. She'd come to Snake River with purpose to build a new life, to escape the shadows of her past, to make a difference in a place that needed her skills. She hadn't come for complications or distractions, especially not in the form of a brooding rancher with eyes that seemed to see through her carefully constructed facade. What she didn't yet understand was that Wade Quincy would become both her greatest challenge and her most unexpected ally in a town harboring secrets as deep as the Wyoming wilderness surrounding it. The boarding house sat on a quiet side street, a modest 2-story structure with a small front porch adorned with potted geraniums struggling against the Wyoming heat. Mrs. Peterson, a widow with iron-gray hair and surprisingly gentle hands, showed Lillian to a clean but sparse room on the 2nd floor. It's not much, the older woman said apologetically, but it's the best we can offer. It's perfect, Lillian assured her, setting her carpetbag on the narrow bed. Through the window, she could see the mountains in the distance, purple shadows against the late afternoon sky. Truly. Mrs. Peterson lingered in the doorway. Mayor Finch says you're from Boston. Must be quite a change. Lillian turned from the window, offering a small smile. Change was what I was looking for, Mrs. Peterson. Well, you found it here in Snake River, the woman replied with a knowing look. Supper's at 6 sharp. Don't be late. The men who board here don't appreciate waiting for their meals. After Mrs. Peterson left, Lillian sat on the edge of the bed, allowing herself a moment of doubt. What had she done, coming to this wild place so far from everything familiar? Her fingers went to the locket at her throat, the last connection to her life before. Inside was a tiny portrait of her parents, both gone now. Their deaths had freed her from Boston society's stifling expectations, but they'd also set her adrift in a world that had little use for unmarried women of 23 with no fortune. Teaching had been her salvation, a respectable profession that allowed her independence. When the advertisement seeking a schoolteacher for a frontier town had appeared in the Boston paper, she'd seen it as Providence. Now, sitting in this bare room with the sounds of a strange town filtering through the open window, she wondered if she'd been foolish rather than brave. A knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find a young girl of perhaps 12, with freckles scattered across her nose and bright copper hair braided down her back. Miss Blackett, I'm Emily Peterson, Mrs. Peterson's granddaughter. She thrust forward a small bouquet of wildflowers. Welcome to Snake River. I'll be in your class. Lillian accepted the flowers with genuine delight. Thank you, Emily. These are lovely. I picked them myself, the girl said proudly. Most folks don't think much of wildflowers, but I think they're prettier than garden flowers. They have to be strong to grow where nobody plants them. That's quite insightful, Lillian said, touched by the girl's perspective. I think I'll need to be a bit like a wildflower here myself. Emily grinned. I can show you around town tomorrow if you'd like. There's not much to see, but it's easy to get lost if you don't know your way. I'd appreciate that very much. After Emily left, Lillian arranged the wildflowers in a water glass on the small table by her bed. Their bright faces seemed like a good omen, a small welcome in a town that had greeted her with more wariness than warmth. Supper was a simple but hearty affair of beef stew, cornbread, and apple pie. The dining room housed 6 other boarders, besides Lillian 4 men who worked at the mine, the telegraph operator, and the young assistant to the town doctor. Conversation flowed around her, with the men occasionally directing polite questions her way, but mostly discussing local matters among themselves. Wade Quincy had another run-in with the Blackwater Mining Company, the telegraph operator, Mr. Jenkins, mentioned as he buttered his 3rd piece of cornbread. Again, Mrs. Peterson sighed, refilling coffee cups. That man's going to get himself killed. What's the dispute about? Lillian found herself asking, immediately drawing all eyes to her. There was an uncomfortable pause before one of the miners, an older man with a white beard, answered. Water rights, miss. The Blackwater Mining Company's been diverting water from the creek that runs through Quincy's land. Says they need it for their operations. Quincy says they're poisoning the water and killing his cattle. And who's right? She pressed. The men exchanged glances. Doesn't much matter who's right, Mr. Jenkins said finally. Blackwater's got money and men with guns. Quincy's just got his ranch, his hands, and his stubborn pride. And his reputation, added the doctor's assistant, a young man named Frederick. No one wants to cross Wade Quincy, not after what happened at Devil's Gulch. Mrs. Peterson cleared her throat loudly. That's enough of that talk. Miss Blackett doesn't need to hear old stories her first night here. She fixed Lillian with a meaningful look. Some matters in Snake River are best left alone, especially for newcomers. The conversation shifted to safer topics, but Lillian's curiosity had been piqued. What had happened at Devil's Gulch? And why did everyone seem both wary of and reluctant to speak ill of Wade Quincy? The man she'd glimpsed briefly that afternoon hadn't seemed like someone with a fearsome reputation, just a hard-working rancher with tired eyes. After dinner, Lillian retired to her room to review the school records Mayor Finch had provided. Snake River's school was small, 27 children ranging from 6 to 16 years of age, with widely varying levels of education. Some had been attending regularly for years, while others came only when their families didn't need them for work. A soft knock interrupted her preparations. Mrs. Peterson stood at the door with a steaming cup of tea. "Thought you might like this," she said, setting the cup on Lillian's desk. "Chamomile to help you sleep your first night." "That's very kind, thank you." Mrs. Peterson lingered, her eyes falling on the school records spread across the desk. "You've taken on quite a challenge, Miss Blackett." "I've never been one to shy away from challenges," Lillian replied. The older woman smiled. "I can see that, but Snake River, it's not like other places. We have our own way of doing things." "I understand I'll need to adapt. It's more than that," Mrs. Peterson interrupted gently. "This town has secrets, old grudges, unwritten rules. I heard the men talking at dinner, and I want to caution you, be careful what questions you ask, especially about Wade Quincy." Lillian frowned. "I was merely curious about the conflict with the mining company. It seems like an issue of justice." "Justice isn't always straightforward out here, Mrs. Peterson said. "And Wade Quincy." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "He's a good man at heart, but dangerous to be associated with. The mining company has powerful friends. They've been trying to drive him out for years." "Why not just sell his land if it's causing so much trouble?" Mrs. Peterson's expression softened with something like sympathy. "That land is all he has left of his family. His father built that ranch from nothing. Wade would die before giving it up, and there are plenty who'd oblige him." She moved toward the door, then turned back. "I'm not saying don't be friendly if your paths cross. Just be careful. Snake River hasn't been kind to outsiders who get involved in local disputes." With that cryptic warning, she bid Lillian good night. Later, as Lillian lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a frontier town settling into night, she couldn't shake the image of Wade Quincy from her mind. There was something in his stance, in the direct way he'd looked at her across the dusty street, that suggested a man who stood his ground regardless of the cost. A man fighting for something he believed in. She knew what that was like. After all, wasn't that why she'd come to Wyoming? To stand her ground, to build something meaningful, to leave behind the whispers and pitying glances that had followed her in Boston after the scandal. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of rushing water, angry voices, and stormy eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed walls. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Emily arrived promptly after breakfast, eager to show Lillian around Snake River. The town was larger than it had first appeared, with a main street boasting a general store, 2 saloons, a bank, the telegraph office, a small hotel, and various other businesses. Side streets revealed modest homes, a church, the doctor's office, and finally, the schoolhouse at the eastern edge of town. "It's not much," Emily admitted as they stood before the white clapboard building. "But Mr. Fanning, he was the teacher before you fixed it up real nice inside." "What happened to Mr. Fanning?" Lillian asked, trying the door and finding it unlocked. Emily's expression clouded. "He left sudden-like after getting on the wrong side of Mr. Blackwater, the mining company owner," she clarified. Mr. Fanning spoke up at a town meeting about the creek water turning funny colors. 2 days later, he was gone. Inside, the schoolhouse was indeed neat and well organized. A dozen rows of benches faced a large chalkboard. Bookshelves lined one wall, surprisingly well stocked for a frontier school. A pot-bellied stove stood in the corner, and large windows let in ample light. "It's lovely," Lillian said, running her fingers along the teacher's desk at the front of the room. Mr. Fanning must have cared deeply about education. He did, Emily agreed. He was teaching us Shakespeare before he left. "Do you know Shakespeare, Miss Blackett?" "I do indeed," Lillian smiled. "Perhaps we can continue where Mr. Fanning left off." They were examining the books when the schoolhouse door opened. Lillian turned, expecting perhaps the mayor or another parent, but instead found herself face to face with Wade Quincy. Up close, he was even more imposing than he had appeared from a distance. Tall and broad-shouldered, with those remarkable gray eyes set in a sun-browned face. He removed his hat upon seeing her, revealing dark hair in need of a trim. There was a weariness about him, but also an unmistakable strength. "Miss Blackett," he said, his voice deep and slightly rough as if unused to casual conversation. "I heard you'd arrived." "Mr. Quincy," she acknowledged, wondering how he knew her name. He shifted slightly, seeming almost uncomfortable under her gaze. "My foreman's children attend this school. Jacob and Sarah Miller. I wanted to make sure they'd be in good hands." The implication that she might not be qualified sent a flash of indignation through Lillian. "I assure you, Mr. Quincy, I'm fully certified. I taught for 3 years at one of Boston's finest academies for young ladies." Something like amusement flickered in his eyes. "I meant no offense, Miss Blackett. Snake River isn't Boston. I was concerned you might find our ways primitive." "Education is education, Mr. Quincy, regardless of location," she replied stiffly. "Children deserve the best we can offer them, whether in Boston or Wyoming territory." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough." He glanced around the schoolroom. "Fanning did good work here. Shame how things ended." "Yes, Emily was just telling me he left rather suddenly." Wade's expression hardened. "That's one way of putting it." He looked at Emily. "Your grandmother know you're filling Miss Blackett in on local gossip." Emily flushed. "I wasn't gossiping, Mr. Quincy, just telling her what happened. MMM." He didn't sound convinced. Turning back to Lillian, he said, "Word of advice, Miss Blackett. This town has certain influential people who don't appreciate outsiders asking questions or stirring up trouble." "I'm a school teacher, Mr. Quincy, not a troublemaker," Lillian said coolly. The corner of his mouth twitched. Teaching truth can be trouble enough in Snake River these days. He settled his hat back on his head. "Good day, Miss Blackett. Emily." With a tip of his hat, he was gone, leaving Lillian with the distinct impression she'd just been both warned and challenged. "Don't mind Mr. Quincy," Emily said once he'd left. "He's not really as gruff as he seems." "Ever since his wife died, his wife?" Lillian asked, surprised by the pang of disappointment the words evoked. "Oh, it was years ago, before I was even born," Emily clarified. "Influenza. After that, he pretty much keeps to himself, except when there's trouble with the mining company." Lillian absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the man she'd just met. A widower, running a ranch alone, fighting a seemingly unwinnable battle against powerful interests. No wonder there was a hardness about him. Their tour continued through town, with Emily proudly introducing Lillian to shopkeepers and townspeople. Reactions were mixed. Some welcomed her warmly, while others regarded her with thinly veiled suspicion. By the time they returned to the boarding house for lunch, Lillian had formed a clearer picture of Snake River. A town divided between those loyal to the mining interests that provided jobs and prosperity, and those who sided with the independent farmers and ranchers worried about the mining company's growing influence. It was clear which side Wade Quincy was on. What remained unclear was where she would fit in this divided community, or if she would fit at all. The first day of school arrived with perfect weather and nervous anticipation. Lillian had spent the previous day preparing the schoolhouse, arranging books and supplies, and creating a welcoming environment for her new students. Now, standing at her desk as the children filed in, she felt both excitement and trepidation. 24 students eventually took their seats, ranging from tiny 6-year-olds to gangly teenagers. Emily gave her an encouraging smile from the third row. Near the back sat 2 dark-haired children who bore a striking resemblance to each other, the Miller siblings. She presumed, the children of Wade Quincy's foreman. After introducing herself and taking attendance, Lillian began the task of assessing her students' knowledge levels. It quickly became apparent that their education had been inconsistent at best. Some of the older children read at advanced levels, while others struggled with basic arithmetic. By midday, Lillian had sketched out a plan to divide the class into smaller groups based on ability rather than age for certain subjects. At lunch, eaten outdoors under the shade of an old cottonwood tree, she circulated among the children, learning names and stories. Sarah Miller, a solemn 10-year-old with her brother's serious eyes, approached Lillian with a book clutched to her chest. "Mr. Fanning gave me this before he left," she said, holding out a worn copy of Little Women. "He said I should keep reading even if there wasn't school for a while." Lillian took the book, noting the careful way Sarah had wrapped it in oilcloth to protect it. "Have you finished it?" Sarah nodded. "3 times. Pa says I read too much, but Mr. Quincy told him books are as important as horses on a ranch." "Mr. Quincy said that?" Lillian couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "He has lots of books," Sarah confided. "A whole room full at the ranch house. Sometimes he lets me borrow them when Pa brings us along." The image of Wade Quincy in a library full of books didn't align with the rough rancher she'd met. Before she could inquire further, the afternoon bell rang, calling the children back to their lessons. The remainder of the day passed quickly. By dismissal time, Lillian had a better understanding of each child's abilities and needs. As the students filed out, Mayor Finch appeared in the doorway. "How was your first day, Miss Blackett?" he asked, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his brow. "Very promising," she replied, gathering her papers. "You have some bright children here in Snake River." "Good, good." He shifted uncomfortably. "There's something I should mention. The school board, that's myself, Reverend Holcomb, and Mr. Blackwater will be attending class this Friday to observe." Lillian paused. "Observe? May I ask why?" "Just routine," the mayor assured her hastily. "We like to make sure our teacher is settling in properly. Teaching appropriate subjects. I follow the standard curriculum, Mayor Finch." Of course. It's just Mr. Blackwater is very concerned about certain controversial topics being discussed in school." "Such as?" Lillian prompted, a chill running down her spine despite the warm classroom. Mayor Finch looked uncomfortable. "Environmental concerns, for one. Mining safety. Water rights. These are complex issues best left to adults, don't you agree?" Lillian carefully kept her expression neutral. "I believe in teaching facts, Mayor Finch. Science, history, literature, mathematics. If these subjects occasionally intersect with local concerns, that seems unavoidable." The mayor's smile tightened. "Just remember who pays your salary, Miss Blackett. The school board expects certain discretion." After he left, Lillian sat at her desk, troubled by the encounter. Was this what had happened to Mr. Fanning? Had he refused to censor his teaching to accommodate mining company interests? Lost in thought, she didn't notice the figure in the doorway until a throat cleared softly. She looked up to find Wade Quincy watching her, his expression unreadable. "Finch giving you trouble already?" he asked, entering the classroom and placing a small wooden crate on her desk. Inside were fresh apples and a jar of honey. "From the ranch," he explained when she looked questioningly at him. "Thought your students might enjoy them." "That's very kind, Mr. Quincy, thank you." She ran her fingers over the smooth skin of an apple. "And no, the mayor was simply informing me that the school board will be observing my class on Friday." Wade's jaw tightened. Blackwater wasting no time. Mr. Blackwater seems to have significant influence in Snake River. "Money talks," Wade said grimly, "and Blackwater's got plenty of it. Enough to buy the mayor, the sheriff, and half the town." "But not you," Lillian observed. Something flashed in his eyes. "Some things aren't for sale, Miss Blackett, like principles," she suggested, "like family land, like clean water. Like the right to live without fear of some company man burning your barn because you wouldn't sell." The bitterness in his voice made her look more closely at him. "Has that happened to you?" He didn't answer directly. "Just be careful what you teach when Blackwater's watching." "Fanning wasn't, and look what happened to him." "What did happen to him?" Lillian asked. "No one will give me a straight answer." Wade studied her for a long moment as if weighing her trustworthiness. "He was beaten, badly. Left on the road out of town with a note pinned to his chest warning that next time would be worse." Lillian gasped. "That's criminal. Did the sheriff investigate?" A humorless smile crossed Wade's face. "Sheriff Mills is Blackwater's cousin by marriage. The investigation concluded it must have been drifters passing through." "And you don't believe that?" "I know it wasn't true. Just like I know you should be careful about making waves, Miss Blackett. Snake River isn't kind to reformers." "Is that what you think I am? A reformer?" "I think you're someone who believes in doing what's right," he said quietly. "That's dangerous enough in this town." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Lillian felt a connection that went beyond their brief acquaintance, a recognition of shared values, perhaps, or simply the understanding of what it meant to stand alone. The moment broke when voices sounded outside. Wade stepped back, once again the remote rancher rather than the man who'd shared a confidence. "Enjoy the apples, Miss Blackett. Give my regards to Jacob and Sarah." Before she could thank him again, he was gone, leaving her with more questions than answers about both the town of Snake River and the enigmatic Wade Quincy. The rest of the week passed in a blur of lessons and getting to know her students. Lillian found herself increasingly drawn to the Miller siblings, who possessed both intelligence and a quiet dignity beyond their years. Through them, she learned more about the Q Ranch and its owner, how Wade had taken in their family after their father lost his own small farm to the bank, how he paid fair wages and treated his workers with respect, how he continued fighting the mining company despite increasing pressure. By Friday, Lillian was well prepared for the school board's visit. Her lessons were meticulously planned, avoiding any topics that might be considered controversial while still providing quality education. When Mayor Finch, Reverend Holcomb, and a third man entered the classroom just after lunch, she greeted them with calm professionalism. "Mr. Blackwater," Mayor Finch said, gesturing to the third man, "this is Miss Lillian Blackett, our new teacher." Roland Blackwater was a compact man with cold eyes and an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the simple schoolroom. "Miss Blackett," he acknowledged with a thin smile, "I understand you're from Boston. Quite a change, coming west." "Change can be invigorating, Mr. Blackwater," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. I'm enjoying the challenges Snake River presents." The men seated themselves at the back of the classroom, and Lillian returned to her lesson on American history. She was discussing the Constitutional Convention when Mr. Blackwater raised his hand like a student. "Yes, Mr. Blackwater," she acknowledged, maintaining her composure despite the interruption. "You speak of the Constitution as if its interpretation is settled," he said smoothly. "But surely there's ongoing debate about states' rights versus federal authority, particularly relevant here in the territories, wouldn't you say?" It was a trap. Lillian realized an attempt to draw her into political discourse that could be twisted against her. She smiled pleasantly. "At this level, Mr. Blackwater, we focus on the historical facts. More complex interpretations await these students in higher education." She returned to her lesson, but Blackwater wasn't finished. As she began discussing the Bill of Rights, he interrupted again. "Miss Blackett, do you believe property rights are adequately protected under our current system?" The classroom had gone silent, the children watching wide-eyed as the tension built. Lillian was acutely aware of Jacob and Sarah Miller, whose father worked for the very man Blackwater was trying to undermine through this line of questioning. "I believe the founders created a remarkable framework for governance," she answered carefully. "As to current applications of those principles, I leave such judgments to legal scholars and the courts." Blackwater's eyes narrowed, but before he could press further, there was a commotion at the door. Wade Quincy entered, removing his hat and nodding an apology to Lillian. "Sorry to interrupt, Miss Blackett. I've come about the roof repairs we discussed." They had discussed no such thing, but Lillian seized the lifeline. "Yes, of course, Mr. Quincy. Children, please continue reading the next section silently while I speak with Mr. Quincy outside." On the schoolhouse steps, Wade spoke in a low voice. "Thought you might need rescuing. Blackwater's tactics are predictable." "He was trying to trap me into making political statements," Lillian confirmed, her heart still racing from the confrontation. "Thank you for the intervention." "Blackwater doesn't like losing," Wade cautioned. "Be careful around him." "Are you suggesting I compromise my teaching to appease him?" There was a challenge in her question. Wade studied her face. "I'm suggesting you survive long enough to make a difference, Miss Blackett. These children need you, especially now." "What do you mean, especially now?" He glanced toward the mountains. "Winter's coming. The mine's expanding operations. More families are being forced off their land. These children need someone who'll teach them to think for themselves, not just recite Blackwater's version of how things should be." His words stirred something in Lillian, a sense of purpose that went beyond simply teaching reading and arithmetic. "I didn't come here looking for a fight, Mr. Quincy." "None of us did," he replied quietly, "but sometimes the fight finds you anyway." When they returned to the classroom, the 3 board members were preparing to leave. Blackwater's cold eyes assessed Wade with undisguised hostility. "Quincy." "Interfering as usual." "Just helping with school maintenance, Blackwater. Want to make sure the children have a solid roof over their heads, unlike those mining shacks you call housing." Blackwater's face flushed with anger, but he maintained his composure. "Miss Blackett," he said, turning to Lillian, "you run a satisfactory classroom. However, I would caution you against certain associations. Some elements in Snake River have a regrettable tendency toward troublemaking." His meaning couldn't have been clearer. Lillian lifted her chin. "I believe I'm capable of forming my own judgments about character, Mr. Blackwater. Thank you for your concern." After the board members departed, Wade lingered. "You just made an enemy," he observed, though he didn't sound disapproving. "It appears I've made both an enemy and an ally today," she replied, looking at him questioningly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I host a reading circle at my ranch on Saturday evenings. some of the ranch hands and their families. Nothing formal, just books and conversation. You'd be welcome to join us tomorrow if you're interested. The invitation surprised her. That's very kind. I'd enjoy that. I'll send Jacob with a wagon around 4 if that suits you. After he left, Lillian returned to her students, who erupted into whispered conversations the moment she entered. Emily Peterson's eyes were wide with excitement. "Are you really going to Mr. Quincy's reading circle?" she asked after class. "Nobody from town ever gets invited there." "Is it unusual?" Lillian inquired, intrigued by the girl's reaction. "Mr. Quincy doesn't socialize in town," Emily explained. "People say he's a recluse since his wife died. The only ones who go out to the ranch are the hands and their families." She leaned closer. "My grandmother says he's different with them, not the hard man people in town think he is." Lillian considered this as she packed her materials for the weekend. Wade Quincy was becoming more complex with each encounter: a rough rancher with a library, a widower who hosted reading circles, a man fighting powerful interests while extending kindness to those who worked for him. What had Mrs. Peterson said? That he was a good man at heart, but dangerous to be associated with. As Lillian walked back to the boarding house, she wondered if she was being foolish, allowing herself to be drawn into local conflicts when she'd come to Snake River seeking peace and a fresh start. Yet something about Wade Quincy called to her, not just his handsome face or the rare smile that transformed his features, but the integrity she sensed beneath his guarded exterior. A man standing his ground against injustice, regardless of the cost. Wasn't that what she tried to do in Boston? Standing up to the powerful Carrington family after discovering their son Edward's embezzlement from the school's accounts. Her reward had been dismissal and disgrace when the Carringtons twisted the story to protect their son, painting Lillian as a jilted woman inventing accusations after Edward broke off their courtship. The injustice still burned. Perhaps that's why Wade's fight resonated with her. She recognized the familiar battle of principle against power, of truth against convenient lies. As she prepared for bed that night, Lillian made a decision. She would attend the reading circle, not because Wade Quincy intrigued her, though he did, but because she refused to let Roland Blackwater dictate her associations or intimidate her into isolation. She hadn't surrendered to the Carringtons' influence in Boston. She wouldn't surrender to Blackwater's in Snake River. What she didn't yet realize was that this small act of defiance would set in motion events that would change not only her life but the future of Snake River itself. Saturday dawned clear and bright. Lillian spent the morning grading papers and planning lessons, then devoted the afternoon to preparations for her visit to the Q Ranch. She chose a forest green dress with minimal trimming, practical enough for a ranch visit, but still appropriate for a social gathering. Jacob Miller arrived precisely at 4 with a wagon. He was a serious boy of 12 who carried himself with the dignity of someone much older. "Pa says to apologize for not coming himself, madam," Jacob explained as he helped her into the wagon. "One of the horses is foaling and he couldn't get away." "No apology necessary," Lillian assured him. "I trust you're driving completely." This earned her a rare smile from the boy. As they traveled, Jacob pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area. The road wound through rolling hills dotted with sagebrush and stands of cottonwood trees. In the distance, the mountains stood like sentinels against the sky. "That's Devil's Gulch," Jacob said, indicating a dark cleft in the hillside ahead. "That's where Mr. Quincy stood against the mining company men." "What happened there?" Lillian asked, remembering the reference she'd heard on her first night in town. Jacob glanced at her, then back at the road. 3 years ago, Blackwater's men came to drive our cattle away from the creek. Said the water belonged to the mining company now. Mr. Quincy and some of the hands went to stop them. There was a fight. He paused. 3 mining company men died. Mr. Quincy was shot but survived. Was he charged with a crime? Lillian asked, horrified. Jacob shook his head. Even Sheriff Mills couldn't ignore that Blackwater's men fired first, called it self-defense. But folks in town started looking at Mr. Quincy different after that, like he was dangerous. The Q Ranch came into view as they crested a hill, a sprawling complex of buildings nestled in a valley with a creek winding through it. The main house was larger than Lillian had expected, built of solid logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Nearby stood a large barn, bunkhouses, corrals, and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed on the surrounding hillsides, and horses moved in a distant pasture. "It's beautiful," Lillian murmured. "Mr. Quincy's father built it," Jacob said with evident pride. "Started with nothing but a claim and a dream," Mr. Quincy says. "Now it's the biggest ranch in the county." As they approached, Lillian saw several wagons already parked near the house. Children played in the yard while adults gathered on the porch. Wade stood among them, deep in conversation with a tall man Lillian recognized as Jacob's father, the foreman. When he spotted their wagon, Wade excused himself and came to meet them. "Miss Blackett," he greeted, helping her down from the wagon. "I'm glad you could join us." Up close, he looked different, somehow more relaxed, his features less stern. He traded his dusty work clothes for clean denims and a blue shirt that brought out the gray in his eyes. His dark hair was damp, as if recently washed. "Thank you for the invitation," she replied, suddenly aware of eyes watching them from the porch. "Your ranch is impressive." "Been in my family for 30 years, he said, offering his arm to escort her. "My father came here when this was still open range, built everything you see." As they walked toward the house, Wade introduced her to the gathered ranch hands and their families, about 20 people in all, including children. They welcomed her warmly, with none of the suspicion she often encountered in town. The main house was a surprise. While the exterior was rustic, the interior revealed unexpected refinements: comfortable furniture, woven rugs, landscape paintings on the walls, and books, just as Sarah had said, books everywhere. Shelves lined the walls of the main room, and stacks of volumes occupied tables and the hearth. "My father believed education was as essential as hard work," Wade explained, noting her interest. "He couldn't afford schooling beyond the basics, but he read everything he could get his hands on. Started this collection with 3 books and kept adding whenever he could." "And you've continued the tradition," Lillian observed. A shadow crossed his face. "My wife, Caroline, loved books. After she died, collecting them became a way of keeping her memory alive." Before Lillian could respond, a woman called that dinner was ready. They moved to a long table set up on the porch, laden with simple but abundant food: roast beef, potatoes, corn bread, fresh vegetables from the garden. Lillian found herself seated between Wade and Sarah Miller, with Jacob across from her. The conversation flowed easily around subjects ranging from ranch operations to local news to books recently received from back east. No one mentioned Roland Blackwater or the mining company, yet Lillian sensed an underlying tension whenever the conversation strayed near the topic of the town. After dinner, as twilight settled over the valley, they gathered in the main room for the reading circle. Children sprawled on the floor with pillows while adults took chairs and the sofa. Wade selected a volume from the shelf. "We've been working our way through Dickens," he explained to Lillian. "David Copperfield currently." For the next hour, various members of the group took turns reading chapters aloud. Wade read with surprising eloquence, his deep voice giving life to the characters. When he offered the book to Lillian, she accepted, reading a passage with the dramatic flair she'd developed entertaining her students. When she finished, she looked up to find Wade watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Around them, the ranch hands and their families were discussing the chapter, but for a moment it felt as if they were alone in the room. The spell broke when Sarah tugged at her sleeve, asking a question about the story. The evening continued with more reading and conversation. As darkness fell, lamps were lit, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Later, as people began preparing to leave, Wade invited Lillian to see his private study. The small room off the main living area was a scholar's haven floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive oak desk, a comfortable reading chair by the window, and a globe that must have cost a small fortune. "This is magnificent," she said, running her fingers along the spines of leather-bound volumes. "You could rival some Boston libraries with this collection." "It's my sanctuary," he admitted. "When the world outside gets too complicated, I come here." I wouldn't have expected a rancher to be such a bibliophile. Something like hurt flashed in his eyes. "Because ranchers are supposed to be uncultured, interested only in cattle and horses." "That's not what I meant," she said quickly. "I'm learning that people in Snake River are full of surprises, especially you." His expression softened. "I'm sorry. I'm too accustomed to being judged by appearances." He selected a book from the shelf and handed it to her. "I thought you might enjoy this. It's a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson, not widely appreciated yet, but I find her work illuminating." Lillian accepted the volume, touched by the gesture. "Thank you. I'll treasure it. Keep it as long as you like. Books should be shared, not hoarded." Their fingers brushed as she took the book, sending an unexpected current through her. Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment, Lillian thought he might step closer. Instead, he moved back, maintaining a proper distance. "I should see you home," he said, his voice slightly rough. "It's getting late." The journey back to town was quiet, the night air cool against Lillian's flushed cheeks. Wade handled the wagon with easy confidence, occasionally pointing out constellations overhead. Neither mentioned the moment in the study. Yet Lillian felt a shift in their relationship, a tentative connection forming beyond their shared concerns about the mining company. As they approached the boarding house, Wade slowed the horses. "Miss Blackett, Lillian," he said, using her given name for the first time. "I should warn you, being seen with me may make your position in town more complicated. Because of your conflict with Blackwater. Because Blackwater considers anyone associated with me an enemy." He turned to face her, his expression grave in the moonlight. "The schoolteacher before you learned that the hard way." "I'm not easily intimidated, Mr. Quincy." "Wade," he corrected gently, "and I'm beginning to see that about you." His eyes held hers. "Just be careful. Blackwater plays by different rules, so I've gathered." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for tonight. It was the first time I've felt truly welcome since arriving in Snake River." Something softened in his face. "You're welcome at the ranch anytime, Lillian." The reading circle meets every Saturday. As he helped her down from the wagon, their hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary. Lillian felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear of Roland Blackwater, and everything to do with the man standing before her in the moonlight. "Good night, Wade," she said softly. "Good night, Lillian," he replied, his voice a low rumble that she felt rather than heard. She watched from the porch as he drove away, the book of poetry clutched to her chest like a shield against the complications she knew were coming. The following weeks brought a deepening chill as autumn settled over Snake River. Lillian fell into a rhythm with her teaching, delighting in her students' progress and the growing trust they placed in her. Saturdays at the Q Ranch became the highlight of her week, occasions when she could relax among friends, engage in stimulating conversation, and enjoy Wade's company without the watchful eyes of the town judging every interaction. Their relationship developed slowly, built on shared values and mutual respect rather than grand gestures or declarations. Wade began visiting the schoolhouse after hours, bringing books for her classroom library, or simply talking with her as she prepared lessons. Sometimes they walked together along the creek that ran behind the school, discussing everything from literature to politics to the changing seasons. In town, however, Lillian became increasingly aware of divided loyalties. Some parents greeted her warmly, appreciating her dedication to their children's education. Others grew distant, particularly those employed by the mining company. Whispers followed her when she visited the general store or attended church services. Mrs. Peterson warned her that her association with Wade Quincy was causing talk. "I don't regret my friendships," Lillian told her landlady firmly. "Mr. Quincy is a good man, regardless of what some in town might think." "I don't disagree," Mrs. Peterson sighed. "But Blackwater has a long memory and little mercy for those who cross him." The first direct confrontation came in late October. Lillian had taken her students to the creek for a science lesson, teaching them to test water quality using simple methods. They collected samples from different points along the waterway, noting changes in clarity and content. "Why is the water cloudy here but clear upstream?" she asked as they examined their specimens. "Because of the mine," Jacob Miller answered promptly. "They dump waste into the tributary that joins the creek. Pa says that's why our cattle get sick when they drink downstream." Before Lillian could respond, a voice cut through the crisp autumn air. "Filling children's heads with lies, Miss Blackett." Roland Blackwater approached on horseback, accompanied by two men she recognized as mine supervisors. The children fell silent, drawing closer together. "We're conducting scientific observations, Mr. Blackwater," Lillian replied calmly, though her heart raced. "The children are learning to draw conclusions based on evidence." "Evidence can be misinterpreted," Blackwater said coldly. He dismounted, walking to where the children had lined up their water samples. With a deliberate motion, he knocked them over, spilling the contents into the dirt. Especially by those with predetermined opinions. Gasps came from the children. Sarah Miller's eyes filled with tears. "Those were our experiments," Jacob protested, stepping forward despite his sister's attempt to pull him back. Blackwater's gaze flicked dismissively to the boy. "Science is best left to professionals, boy, not ranchers' brats playing at being scholars." He turned back to Lillian. "I warned you about troublemaking, Miss Blackett. This constitutes direct undermining of the mining company's reputation." "Teaching children to observe their environment is hardly troublemaking," Lillian countered, placing a protective hand on Jacob's shoulder. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to return to the schoolhouse." As she gathered the children, Blackwater stepped closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "Your association with Quincy is noted. I'd hate to see a promising young teacher ruin her career over misplaced loyalties." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Blackwater?" Lillian asked, meeting his gaze steadily. "Merely offering friendly advice." His smile never reached his eyes. "The school board reviews teaching positions annually. Remember that." That evening, Lillian related the incident to Wade when he visited the schoolhouse. His face darkened with anger as she described Blackwater's behavior. "He's getting bolder," Wade said, pacing the narrow space between desks. "First intimidating teachers, now threatening children." "What does he hope to gain?" Lillian asked. Surely he doesn't believe destroying children's science projects will silence concerns about water contamination. It's not about science, Wade explained grimly. It's about control. Blackwater can't afford questions about his operation, not with the new railroad spur being considered. If the territorial governor heard reports of water contamination, there might be inspections, delays, possibly even fines. And that would cost him money. Exactly. Wade stopped pacing, leaning against her desk. The railroad contract would make Blackwater one of the richest men in the territory. He won't let anything stand in his way, not ranchers, not teachers, not children. Lillian felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn evening. What can be done? Surely there's some authority. The nearest federal marshal is 2 days' ride, Wade interrupted. The territorial government is focused on statehood, not mining disputes, and locally. He shrugged. Blackwater owns the sheriff, the mayor, most of the town council, so we just surrender. Allow him to pollute the water, threaten children, and rule through intimidation. Wade's eyes softened as he looked at her. There's no we in this fight, Lillian. I chose this battle years ago. You still have choices. What does that mean? He moved closer, taking her hands in his. It means you could leave Snake River. Find a teaching position in a town without these complications. You're talented, educated, any school would be fortunate to have you. The suggestion stung more than she expected. Are you asking me to leave? I'm asking you to consider your safety, he said quietly. Blackwater's men nearly killed Fanning for less than what you're doing. And if I refuse to be driven away, she lifted her chin, searching his face. If I choose to stay and fight alongside you. Something flickered in his eyes, hope, perhaps, or fear. Then I'd be selfish enough to be grateful for your company in this fight, while hating myself for putting you at risk. They stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. His hands were rough with calluses but held hers with exquisite gentleness. I ran from a fight once before, she admitted. In Boston, I let powerful people smear my reputation rather than continuing to press for justice. I've regretted it ever since. What happened? He asked softly. So she told him about discovering Edward Carrington's embezzlement, about her dismissal when she reported it, about the rumors that destroyed her standing in Boston society. They claimed I invented the accusations because Edward had broken off our courtship, she finished bitterly. In truth, there never was a courtship. He proposed it as a way to silence me, and when I refused, they destroyed me anyway. Wade's expression hardened. And you came west to escape the scandal. I came west to find a place where I could be judged on my merits, not on rumors or family connections, she corrected. I won't run again, Wade. Not from Blackwater, not from anyone. He studied her face for a long moment. You're the bravest woman I've ever known, Lillian Blackett. His voice had roughened with emotion. But Blackwater plays by different rules than even the Carringtons of Boston. He doesn't just ruin reputations, he ruins lives. Then we'll need to be smarter than he is, she said, squeezing his hands. Together. The word hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond their shared cause. Wade's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, a question in his expression. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers, a kiss so gentle it was barely more than a whisper of contact. When he drew back, uncertainty in his eyes, Lillian made her decision. Rising on her toes, she kissed him properly, her hands moving to his shoulders as his arms encircled her waist. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and restraint giving way to a connection that felt both new and inevitable. When they finally parted, both breathless, Wade rested his forehead against hers. I never expected to find someone like you in Snake River, he murmured. "Nor I you," she replied. "But here we are." "Here we are," he echoed, his arms still around her, "standing against Blackwater together." She smiled against his chest. "It's not the most conventional beginning to a courtship." His laugh rumbled through him. "Nothing about us is conventional, Lillian, but I wouldn't have it any other way." As he escorted her back to the boarding house that night, they were both aware that their relationship had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. What neither yet realized was how quickly Blackwater would move to separate them, or how publicly he would try to humiliate Lillian to do it. The town's annual harvest festival arrived in early November, a tradition that brought together residents from Snake River and surrounding farms and ranches. Despite growing tensions, the festival remained neutral ground a day when disputes were set aside in favor of community celebration. Lillian spent the morning helping her students prepare for their recitations as part of the festival program. The schoolhouse had been decorated with autumn leaves and harvest bounty, and a small stage erected for performances. Parents arrived throughout the morning, filling the benches and standing along the walls. To Lillian's surprise, Roland Blackwater attended, taking a prominent seat in the front row alongside Mayor Finch and other town dignitaries. His presence cast a shadow over what should have been a joyous occasion, but Lillian was determined not to let it affect the children's performances. The program went beautifully. Even the youngest students remembered their parts, reciting poems about autumn and harvest. The older children performed a scene from The Tempest, which they had been studying. Jacob Miller, cast as Prospero, delivered his lines with unexpected emotion, earning enthusiastic applause. After the performances, the celebration moved to the town square, where tables had been set up for a community feast. Women had brought their best dishes, and men had roasted several pigs and a side of beef. Music played as people ate, drank cider, and conversed. Lillian circulated among her students' families, accepting compliments on the program and discussing individual children's progress. She was speaking with Emily Peterson's parents when she noticed Wade's arrival at the edge of the square. He had come with several of his ranch hands and their families, including the Millers. Their eyes met across the crowded space, and Lillian felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the autumn sun. They hadn't seen each other since their kiss 3 days earlier, though he'd sent a note with Jacob, simply saying he was looking forward to seeing her at the festival. As she made her way toward him, Roland Blackwater intercepted her, stepping directly into her path. "Miss Blackett, a word if I may." "Of course, Mr. Blackwater," she replied, maintaining a polite facade despite her discomfort. "The children's program was educational," he said, his tone making the words sound like an accusation. "I was particularly interested in your choice of Shakespeare's Tempest, a play about usurpation and the rightful restoration of power. Rather pointed, wouldn't you say?" Lillian met his gaze steadily. "It's a play about forgiveness and reconciliation, Mr. Blackwater. Themes I thought appropriate for a community celebration." "Indeed." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I wonder if you're aware that your association with certain elements in our community is causing concern among parents." "If parents have concerns, I encourage them to speak with me directly," Lillian replied. "My door is always open." "Some matters are better addressed publicly," Blackwater said, his voice rising just enough to draw attention from nearby conversations. "For instance, your inappropriate relationship with Wade Quincy." Conversations around them faltered. Heads turned in their direction. Lillian felt heat rising in her cheeks, but kept her composure. "My personal associations are my own concern, Mr. Blackwater." "Not when they affect the moral education of Snake River's children," he countered, his voice louder still. A schoolteacher must be above reproach. Unchaperoned visits to a bachelor's ranch, private meetings after school hours, these are not the actions of a woman we should entrust with our children. The crowd had gone silent. Lillian was acutely aware of dozens of eyes upon her, of whispers starting at the edges of the gathering. Shame and anger warred within her, shame at being publicly accused, anger at the deliberate humiliation Blackwater was inflicting. "You forget yourself, sir," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I have conducted myself with complete propriety at all times." "That's not what my sources tell me," Blackwater pressed, clearly enjoying her discomfort. "They report quite different behavior during your private meetings with Quincy." A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone gasped. Lillian saw Mrs. Peterson looking stricken, the Reverend's wife whispering behind her hand to another woman. The accusation, with its deliberate vagueness, left room for the worst assumptions. Before Lillian could respond, Wade pushed through the crowd, his expression thunderous. "That's enough, Blackwater," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Blackwater turned with mock surprise. "Ah, Quincy, come to defend your lady friend's honor. Rather late for that, I'd say." "You're publicly slandering a respected teacher based on nothing but malicious gossip," Wade said, standing beside Lillian. "Take it back or face the consequences." "Consequences?" Blackwater laughed. "What will you do, Quincy? Shoot me like you did my men at Devil's Gulch?" "That would certainly confirm everything I've said about Miss Blackett's poor judgment in companions." The crowd edged back, creating a clear space around the three of them. Lillian saw the sheriff moving toward them, his hand on his gun belt. Tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. "I'll give you one chance to apologize to Miss Blackett," Wade said quietly, dangerously. Blackwater smirked. "For telling the truth, I think not." He turned to address the crowd. "Good people of Snake River, is this the moral example we want for our children? A woman who consorts with a known killer, who visits his ranch unchaperoned, who conducts private lessons after school hours." Whispers rippled through the gathering. Lillian saw accusation in some faces, uncertainty in others, and in a few, like Mrs. Peterson and the Millers, distress and sympathy. "They tried to humiliate her in front of the crowd," Wade said, his voice carrying across the square. He stepped forward, placing himself between Lillian and Blackwater. "Then the crowd will watch me fight." The declaration hung in the air, a challenge that couldn't be withdrawn. Blackwater's smirk faltered. "Fight? You're proposing violence at a community celebration." "Further proof of your unsuitability, Quincy." "Not violence," Wade clarified, his voice steady. "A legal challenge. I'm challenging your water rights claim, Blackwater, here and now before witnesses." This was unexpected. Lillian saw confusion on Blackwater's face, quickly masked. "Water rights? What are you talking about?" "The territorial court has already agreed to hear my case," Wade continued, addressing the crowd now more than Blackwater. "I've spent months gathering evidence of water contamination from the mine. Evidence that proves Blackwater's operation is violating not just my rights as a downstream landowner, but territorial law regarding water pollution." Murmurs swept through the crowd. Blackwater's face darkened with anger. "This is absurd. You have no case." "I have water samples. I have cattle autopsy reports. I have witness statements from families whose children have fallen ill after swimming in the creek downstream from your mine." Wade looked around at the gathered townspeople. "And I have a federal investigator arriving next week to conduct an official inquiry." Blackwater's face had gone pale beneath his tan. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Wade reached into his coat and withdrew an official-looking document. "This came by special courier yesterday." The territorial governor has ordered an investigation following multiple complaints about the Blackwater Mining Company's environmental practices. Complaints filed by myself and others over the past year. He handed the document to Mayor Finch, who took it with evident reluctance. It appears to be genuine, the mayor admitted after examining it. So you see, Blackwater, Wade continued, your attempt to discredit Miss Blackett and me has failed. The truth about your operation is coming to light, regardless of how many school teachers you threaten or how many reputations you try to destroy. Blackwater's humiliation was now complete, caught in a public forum trying to smear a respected teacher, only to have his own misdeeds exposed. His face contorted with rage. This isn't over, Quincy, he snarled. Not by a long shot. As he stalked away, his cronies following, the crowd erupted into conversation. Some looked shocked, others vindicated. Mayor Finch appeared deeply uncomfortable, while Sheriff Mills seemed uncertain whether to follow Blackwater or remain with the townspeople. Wade turned to Lillian, concern in his eyes. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she assured him, though her hands trembled slightly. "That was unexpected." "I'm sorry you were caught in the middle," he said quietly. "Blackwater was trying to get to me through you. I should have anticipated it." "You couldn't have known he'd choose such a public venue," Lillian said. She glanced around at the still buzzing crowd. "Do you really have a federal investigator coming?" Wade nodded. "I've been working on the legal challenge for months. The timing of the investigator's arrival is fortunate. I only received confirmation yesterday." Mrs. Peterson approached them, her expression troubled. "Miss Blackett, are you all right? That was a terrible thing for Blackwater to do." "I'm quite all right, Mrs. Peterson. Thank you for your concern." The older woman glanced between them. "People will talk, you know." "Even with Mr. Quincy's dramatic intervention, the damage to your reputation is minimal compared to the damage Blackwater has done to this community," Lillian interrupted gently. "I'm not concerned about gossip, Mrs. Peterson. The truth will stand on its own." Wade's hand found hers, a public declaration that wasn't lost on Mrs. Peterson or the onlookers still watching them. "Lillian has nothing to be ashamed of," he said firmly. "Nor do I. Blackwater tried to use innuendo and lies to discredit us because he fears the truth about his operation coming to light." Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened at their joined hands, but after a moment, she nodded. "Well, I suppose if you're prepared to weather the storm together." She straightened her shoulders. "I'll have no part in spreading gossip, and I'll make sure my boarders know I support you, Miss Blackett." As Mrs. Peterson moved away, other townspeople began approaching, some to express support, others to hear more about the federal investigation, still others simply curious about this new development in the ongoing Quincy-Blackwater feud. Through it all, Wade stayed beside Lillian, his presence a steady anchor amid the swirling currents of public opinion. Later, as the festival wound down and twilight settled over Snake River, Wade walked Lillian back to the boarding house. The streets were quiet, most residents still at the square enjoying the last of the celebration. "I'm sorry your first harvest festival ended like this," Wade said as they strolled slowly, reluctant to end their time together. "I'm not," Lillian replied thoughtfully. "Blackwater's attack was unpleasant, but your response was illuminating." Wade glanced at her. "Illuminating? You could have challenged him to a physical fight. Many men would have. Instead, you chose the law's strategy requiring patience, intelligence, and faith in justice." She smiled up at him. "It confirmed what I already believed about your character." They stopped at the gate to the boarding house, the lamplight from inside casting a warm glow across the porch. Wade turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Blackwater won't give up easily," he warned. The investigation may expose his practices, but he still has power and influence. He'll strike back. I know, she said simply. I'm prepared for that. Wade studied her face in the gathering darkness. Are you? It could get worse before it gets better. He might try to have you removed from your position. Let him try, Lillian said with quiet determination. The children need me. The community needs truth. I won't abandon either. Something softened in Wade's expression. I believed I'd lost the capacity for hope after Caroline died, he admitted. But you, Lillian Blackett, you make me hope again. He leaned down and kissed her, there on the public street in full view of anyone who might pass by. It was a declaration as clear as any words could be that he stood with her, reputation and rumors be damned. When they parted, Lillian touched his cheek gently. We'll face whatever comes together, she promised. Blackwater may have power, but we have truth on our side, and each other. Wade nodded, a smile touching his lips. And that, I'm beginning to believe, might be enough. As Lillian watched him walk back toward the town square where his horse waited, she felt a certainty she hadn't experienced since coming to Snake River. Whatever Blackwater planned next, whatever challenges lay ahead, she was no longer facing them alone. For the first time since the scandal in Boston, she felt not just the burden of standing for truth, but the strength that came from standing with someone who shared her values and her courage. The federal investigator arrived the following Tuesday, a serious young man named Thomas Harrington, with wire-rimmed spectacles and a no-nonsense demeanor. He established himself at the town hotel and immediately began interviewing residents and collecting water samples from various points along the creek. Blackwater's initial response was to deny access to the mine, but Harrington produced federal orders that even Sheriff Mills couldn't ignore. Reluctantly, Blackwater was forced to allow the investigator to inspect the mining operation and its waste disposal methods. For 5 days, Harrington methodically built his case, accompanied by Wade during visits to affected ranches and farms downstream from the mine. Lillian continued teaching, aware of whispers among some parents, but supported by others who had witnessed Blackwater's attempt to humiliate her at the festival. On the 6th day, everything changed. Lillian was walking to the schoolhouse before dawn to prepare for the day when she noticed smoke rising from the direction of the school. Breaking into a run, she rounded the corner to find the schoolhouse engulfed in flames, the wooden structure crackling as fire consumed it. No, she cried, rushing forward only to be held back by a man who emerged from the shadows. Too late for that, miss, the man said, his face partially concealed by a bandana. Blackwater sends his regards. He shoved her roughly to the ground and mounted a waiting horse, galloping away as shouts began to rise from nearby homes, people awakening to the commotion. By the time the town's volunteer bucket brigade arrived, the schoolhouse was beyond saving. They focused instead on preventing the fire from spreading to neighboring buildings. Lillian watched numbly as her classroom, with all its books, teaching materials, and student work was reduced to ashes. Wade arrived as dawn broke, having ridden into town at the first sign of smoke on the horizon. His face was grim as he helped Lillian to her feet from where she sat watching the last walls collapse. "Are you hurt?" he asked, examining her for injuries. "No," she said, her voice hollow. "But the school, all those books, the children's work. We'll rebuild," he promised. "But first, tell me what happened. Did you see who did this?" She described the man with the bandana and his parting message. Wade's expression darkened. "We need to find Harrington," he said. "This is intimidation of a federal witness. Blackwater has crossed a line that even his money can't protect him from." Throughout the day, as news of the schoolhouse fire spread, townspeople's reactions were mixed. Some whispered that it was divine judgment on an improper teacher. Others, particularly the families of Lillian's students, expressed outrage and offered support. By noon, the town was simmering with tension. Mayor Finch called an emergency town meeting for that evening. As dusk fell, it seemed all of Snake River had crowded into the church, the only building large enough to accommodate everyone. Reverend Holcomb offered a prayer for calm and wisdom before turning the meeting over to the mayor. "This act of arson is an outrage," Mayor Finch began, surprising Lillian with his forceful condemnation. "Regardless of personal feelings or business disputes, the destruction of our children's schoolhouse cannot be tolerated." Roland Blackwater sat in the front row, his face a mask of concern. "Hear, hear," he called out. "A despicable act. I propose the mining company donate funds for rebuilding immediately." Wade, standing at the back with Lillian, made a sound of disgust. "The gall of the man," he muttered. "Furthermore," Blackwater continued, rising to address the crowd, "I suggest we offer a reward for information leading to the arrest of the perpetrators. $100 from my own pocket." Murmurs of approval rippled through some sections of the gathering. "That's very generous, Mr. Blackwater," Mayor Finch acknowledged. "Now, regarding temporary arrangements for the school, if I may," Harrington interrupted, stepping forward from where he had been observing quietly. "This fire occurred during a federal investigation, and a witness has reported direct intimidation connecting it to that investigation. This is now a federal matter." A hush fell over the church. Blackwater's expression hardened. "What are you implying, Mr. Harrington?" "I'm not implying anything, Mr. Blackwater. I'm stating facts." Harrington adjusted his spectacles. "Miss Blackett has provided testimony regarding water quality and its effect on the health of schoolchildren. She reported a direct threat connecting this fire to her testimony. That constitutes federal witness intimidation." "One woman's claim with no corroboration," Blackwater scoffed. "Hardly enough for federal intervention." "Perhaps," Harrington conceded. "But when combined with my findings regarding your mining operations' violation of multiple territorial water regulations, it establishes a pattern of disregard for the law." He turned to address the crowd. "My report, which will be submitted to the territorial governor tomorrow, recommends immediate cessation of the Blackwater Mining Company's current waste disposal practices, significant fines for environmental damage, and a criminal investigation into tonight's arson." The church erupted into chaos, shouts, arguments, accusations flying across the room. Through it all, Blackwater remained oddly composed, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth that Lillian found more disturbing than anger would have been. Sheriff Mills called for order, his voice barely audible above the commotion. Eventually, the noise subsided enough for Mayor Finch to speak again. "Until this matter is resolved," he announced, "classes will be held in the church meeting room. Miss Blackett, can you be ready to resume teaching tomorrow?" Before Lillian could respond, Blackwater rose again. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mayor. The school board met in emergency session this afternoon and voted to suspend Miss Blackett pending investigation of her professional conduct." Gasps and murmurs swept through the church. Wade tensed beside Lillian, his hand finding hers in the shadows. "On what grounds?" Lillian demanded, stepping forward. Blackwater's smile widened fractionally. "Moral turpitude, unprofessional relationship with a parent, use of classroom position to advance political views against local industry. The list is quite extensive." "This is absurd," Wade interjected, moving to stand beside Lillian. "The school board consists of Blackwater, the mayor, and Reverend Holcomb, two of whom are in Blackwater's pocket." "That's slander, Quincy," Mayor Finch sputtered, though his refusal to meet Wade's eyes suggested truth in the accusation. "Is it?" Wade challenged. "Then let's put it to a proper vote. The town charter allows for community decisions regarding the school when the board is deadlocked or compromised. I call for a vote of the parents and taxpayers of Snake River on whether Miss Blackett should continue teaching." This caused another uproar. Blackwater's confident expression faltered slightly as parents began calling out in support of Wade's proposal. The Reverend, looking uncomfortable, finally stood. "Mr. Quincy is correct about the charter," he admitted reluctantly. "As a matter of process, the community can override the board under certain circumstances." "This is highly irregular," Blackwater protested, but the tide of public opinion had already begun to turn. Parents of Lillian's students were particularly vocal in their support, led by the Miller family, and surprisingly, Mrs. Peterson, who stood to speak powerfully about Lillian's positive influence on her granddaughter Emily. When the improvised vote was finally taken, the result was clear. 37 in favor of Lillian continuing as teacher, 19 opposed. Mayor Finch, looking both relieved and apprehensive, declared that classes would resume in the church meeting room the following day. Blackwater's face had darkened to a dangerous red. As the meeting broke up, he pushed his way to where Lillian and Wade stood. "You think you've won," he said, his voice low and menacing. "But this is just the beginning. By the time I'm finished, there won't be a school board willing to hire you anywhere in the territory. As for you, Quincy, enjoy your ranch while you can. Accidents happen, especially to troublemakers." Wade stepped forward, placing himself between Blackwater and Lillian. "That sounded remarkably like a threat, Blackwater. Care to repeat it for Mr. Harrington's benefit?" The federal investigator had approached quietly, notebook in hand. "Indeed, Mr. Blackwater. I'd be most interested in clarification of your last statement." Blackwater's expression shifted to artificial congeniality. "Simply expressing concern for the dangers of ranch life, Mr. Harrington. No threat intended." He tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "Good evening to you all." As he walked away, Wade turned to Lillian. "You shouldn't be alone tonight. Blackwater's desperate, and desperate men are dangerous." "She can stay with us," Mrs. Peterson offered, having overheard. "I'll make up the spare room." Harrington cleared his throat. "Actually, I believe Miss Blackett should remain under federal protection until my investigation is complete. Her testimony regarding the arson threat is vital." "I can protect her at the ranch," Wade said. "We have plenty of hands, all armed and loyal." "That would be inappropriate under the circumstances," Harrington replied, glancing meaningfully at the remaining townspeople within earshot. Given the nature of Blackwater's accusations against Miss Blackett, her reputation must be protected as vigorously as her person. Lillian understood the logic, even as she chafed at the constraints of propriety. "Mr. Harrington is right," she said reluctantly. "I'll stay at the hotel tonight under official protection." Wade looked as if he might argue, but finally nodded. "I'll have men watching the hotel as well," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't negotiable. "Blackwater has too many allies in town to trust official protection alone." As the church emptied, Lillian found herself surrounded by parents thanking her for her dedication to their children and offering to help replace lost teaching materials. Their support warmed her, yet she couldn't shake the chill that had settled into her bones at Blackwater's parting words. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Later, as she settled into a room at the small hotel with a deputy posted outside her door, Lillian tried to quiet her racing thoughts. So much had changed in the few short months since her arrival in Snake River. She had come seeking peace and a fresh start, only to find herself in the center of a conflict that threatened not just her position but potentially her safety. Yet she couldn't bring herself to regret it. In Wade, she had found not only an ally but a man who awakened feelings she had thought long buried after the betrayal in Boston. In her students, she had found purpose. In standing against Blackwater's intimidation, she had reclaimed the courage that scandal had nearly stolen from her. A soft knock at her window startled her. Drawing the curtain back cautiously, she found Wade perched on the narrow ledge outside, balanced precariously between the window frame and a drainpipe. "Wade," she whispered, raising the sash. "What are you doing? You could break your neck." "I needed to see you," he said simply, climbing through with surprising grace for such a large man. "The deputy's been called away conveniently. I don't trust Blackwater not to try something tonight. So you decided to scale the hotel wall." She couldn't help but smile despite her concern. Seemed the most direct approach. He returned her smile briefly before his expression sobered. "Lillian, I need you to consider leaving Snake River until this is resolved." "Leaving? After what happened tonight? The parents voted to keep me as teacher. The children need me now more than ever." Blackwater burned the school once. He could do worse next time. Wade took her hands, his eyes intense. "I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of this fight." "This isn't just your fight anymore," she reminded him gently. "It's mine too, our students, the town's." "I won't abandon them now." He searched her face, then sighed. "I knew you'd say that. It's one of the reasons I've fallen in love with you." The words, spoken so simply, took her breath away. "Wade, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted. "It's too soon, I know. But with everything happening, I needed you to know how I feel. If something were to happen, nothing will happen," she insisted, squeezing his hands. "And it's not too soon." She took a deep breath. "I love you too, Wade Quincy. Your strength, your integrity, your kindness, I've never known a man like you." He pulled her close, his kiss both tender and urgent, a declaration and a promise wrapped together. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "When this is over," he murmured, "when Blackwater is dealt with and the school rebuilt, we'll have time," she assured him, "for everything." A noise in the hallway made them both tense. Wade moved to the window. "That'll be Wilson coming to relieve the deputy. I should go before I'm seen." "Be careful," she urged as he prepared to climb back out onto the ledge. "Always." He kissed her once more, quickly. "Lock this behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me or Harrington. I'll be watching the hotel all night with some of my men." After he left, Lillian secured the window and leaned against it, her heart full. Despite the danger, despite Blackwater's threats, she felt a certainty that had eluded her for years. Whatever came next, she and Wade would face it together. What she couldn't know was that Blackwater had already set in motion a plan that would test that certainty to its limits, a plan designed not just to remove her from Snake River, but to destroy Wade Quincy once and for all. Dawn broke with a clear sky that belied the tensions simmering in Snake River. Lillian prepared for her first day teaching in the church meeting room, grateful for the parents who had arrived early to help arrange benches and set up a makeshift chalkboard. By 8 o'clock, most of her students had arrived, their faces a mixture of excitement at the novel situation and lingering distress about the loss of their schoolhouse. "We'll manage just fine," Lillian assured them, maintaining a cheerful demeanor despite her own concerns. "In fact, we have an opportunity to learn about adaptation and resilience firsthand." She had just begun the morning lessons when the church door burst open. Sheriff Mills entered, followed by 2 deputies and a well-dressed stranger carrying a leather portfolio. "Miss Blackett," the sheriff announced, his expression uncomfortable but determined. "You need to come with us." Lillian straightened, conscious of 24 pairs of young eyes watching anxiously. Sheriff Mills, I'm in the middle of teaching. Whatever this is about will have to wait until after school hours. It can't wait, madam, Mills insisted. There's been a complaint, a serious one. The stranger stepped forward. Miss Blackett, I'm James Foster, attorney for Mr. Edward Carrington of Boston. I have here a warrant for your arrest on charges of embezzlement and slander. A shocked murmur ran through the children. Lillian felt the blood drain from her face. That's absurd. Mr. Carrington is the one who embezzled funds. I merely reported it. The Boston authorities disagree, Foster said smoothly. Mr. Carrington has provided extensive documentation proving his innocence and your guilt. The governor of Massachusetts has requested your extradition to stand trial. Lillian's mind raced. How had Edward Carrington found her? How had he convinced authorities to pursue charges across such distance? The answer came in a flash of clarity as she spotted Roland Blackwater watching from the church doorway, satisfaction evident in his smirk. This is Blackwater's doing, she said, addressing Sheriff Mills directly. He's conspired with the Carringtons to fabricate these charges. Mills avoided her gaze. That's for the courts to decide, Miss Blackett. Now, please come quietly. Don't make this harder on yourself or the children. Emily Peterson stood suddenly. You can't take Miss Blackett. She didn't do anything wrong. Other children joined in, voices rising in protest until the small room echoed with their objections. Lillian raised her hands for silence. Children, she said firmly, this is a misunderstanding that will be resolved. In the meantime, I need you to be brave and continue your studies. She turned to Sarah Miller, the most mature of her older students. Sarah, please lead the class in reading practice until Mrs. Peterson arrives. I've already sent for her. As if summoned by her words, Mrs. Peterson appeared at the door, pushing past Blackwater with a glare. What's happening here? She demanded. Sheriff Mills explained the situation while Lillian gathered her things, determined to maintain dignity despite the humiliation of being arrested before her students. She knew Blackwater was orchestrating this spectacle deliberately, first attempting to publicly discredit her at the festival, now arranging for her arrest during school hours to maximum effect. This is outrageous, Mrs. Peterson declared when Mills finished. Everyone knows Miss Blackett is a woman of impeccable character. Take care of my students, please, Lillian requested as the deputies moved to escort her out. Tell them not to worry. Wade will sort this out, Mrs. Peterson assured her in a low voice. He's gone to meet the territorial governor's representative about the mining investigation. He'll be back by nightfall. Lillian nodded, drawing strength from the knowledge that Wade would fight for her as fiercely as she had fought for him. As the deputies led her from the church, she held her head high, refusing to give Blackwater the satisfaction of seeing her distress. The crowd outside had grown as word of the arrest spread. Blackwater stepped forward as they emerged, his expression one of false concern. Such a shame, he said loudly enough for all to hear. To think we entrusted our children to a fugitive from justice. Thank goodness, her true character has been revealed before more damage could be done. Lillian stopped, turning to face him despite the deputy's hands on her arms. We both know these charges are false, Mr. Blackwater, just as we both know why you're doing this. I'm simply a concerned citizen, he replied, his eyes cold. One who recognizes the importance of moral leadership for our children. No, she countered, raising her voice to address the growing crowd. You're a man who pollutes our water, intimidates our teachers, burns our schools, and corrupts our officials, all to protect your profits. Blackwater's face darkened. Sheriff, control your prisoner. Come along, Miss Blackett, Mills urged, clearly uncomfortable with the public confrontation. As they led her toward the jailhouse, Lillian saw parents from her class watching with distress, minors observing with curiosity, and townspeople whispering among themselves. The damage to her reputation was being done exactly as Blackwater had planned. The small jailhouse at the edge of town consisted of just 3 cells and a sheriff's office. Lillian was placed in the furthest cell, a small space with a narrow cot, a wash basin, and a barred window overlooking an alley. "I'm sorry about this, Miss Blackett," Sheriff Mills said quietly as he locked the cell door. "If it were up to me." "But it's not up to you, is it, Sheriff?" she replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "It's up to Blackwater like everything else in this town." Mills had the grace to look ashamed. "I'm just doing my job. The extradition papers appear legitimate." "Of course they do. The Carringtons have as much money and influence in Boston as Blackwater does here." Lillian sat on the cot, smoothing her skirts with deliberate composure. "How long before I'm transported east?" "Foster says the paperwork will take a few days." Mills hesitated. "For what it's worth, I don't believe you're guilty of what they're claiming. Neither do most folks in town. Yet here I am." After the sheriff left, Lillian allowed herself a moment of fear. The Carringtons had wealth, political connections, and a vested interest in discrediting her. If she were returned to Boston to face trial, would anyone believe her version of events over Edward's carefully constructed lies? The hours passed slowly. At midday, Deputy Wilson brought a tray with a simple meal and informed her that several townspeople had stopped by to express concern, including Mrs. Peterson, who had promised to return with clean clothing and personal items. "There's talk in town," Wilson added, his voice low. "Not everyone's happy about your arrest. Some are saying it's too convenient, coming right after the school burning and the federal investigation." "And what do you think, Deputy?" Lillian asked. Wilson glanced over his shoulder, ensuring they were alone. "I think Blackwater's scared. The governor's sending more investigators based on Harrington's preliminary report. This feels like desperation to me." His assessment aligned with Lillian's own thoughts. Blackwater was striking out in all directions, trying to neutralize threats to his mining operation. The burning of the schoolhouse hadn't silenced her. Perhaps he hoped legal entanglement would. As evening approached, Lillian heard a commotion from the sheriff's office, raised voices, then the sound of boots on the wooden floor. Her heart leapt with hope that Wade had returned, but it was Roland Blackwater who appeared at her cell door, accompanied by Sheriff Mills and the Boston attorney. "Come to gloat, Mr. Blackwater?" she asked, rising to face them. "I've come to offer a proposition, Miss Blackett," Blackwater replied, his tone smoothly reasonable. "One that could resolve this unfortunate situation to everyone's benefit." "I'm listening." "The charges against you are serious," he began. "Embezzlement carries a prison sentence in Massachusetts. However, Mr. Carrington is primarily concerned with clearing his name, not seeing you punished." "How magnanimous," Lillian said dryly. "Especially considering he's the guilty party." Blackwater continued as if she hadn't spoken. "If you were to sign a confession admitting to the embezzlement and retracting your accusations against Mr. Carrington, he would be willing to drop the charges provided you leave the territory immediately and permanently." "A confession to crimes I didn't commit," Lillian clarified. "In exchange for freedom and exile. Consider it an opportunity to start fresh somewhere else," Blackwater suggested. "California, perhaps, or Oregon, somewhere far from both Boston and Wyoming." Lillian studied his face, understanding the real purpose of his offer. "And what about Wade Quincy? What happens to him in this arrangement?" Something flickered in Blackwater's eyes, surprise that she had so quickly identified his true motive. "Quincy isn't part of this discussion." "Isn't he?" This isn't about Edward Carrington's reputation. It's about removing me from Snake River because you see me as an ally to Wade in his fight against you." She stepped closer to the bars. "What you really want is for me to abandon him, to leave him isolated again so you can continue your campaign to drive him off his land." Blackwater's pleasant facade slipped. "Quincy is a problem that will be dealt with one way or another. Your departure would simply spare you from witnessing the inevitable." "Is that a threat against him?" "It's a business reality," Blackwater said coldly. "The railroad is coming. Progress is coming. Quincy and his outdated notions about land rights are standing in the way. Men who obstruct progress tend to get crushed beneath its wheels." Lillian felt a chill at the calculated menace in his words. "I won't sign a false confession, and I won't abandon the people of Snake River, especially not Wade." "Then you'll face trial in Boston," Blackwater said with a shrug. "By the time the courts sort it out, if they ever do, Quincy's fight will be long over." He nodded to Foster. "She's all yours. Make the arrangements to transport her east as soon as possible." After they left, Lillian sank onto the cot, her mind racing. Blackwater's threats against Wade were not idle, she was certain of that. Somehow, she needed to warn him, to make him understand the lengths to which Blackwater would go to remove obstacles to his plans. Night had fallen when she heard a soft tapping at the window of her cell. Rising cautiously, she peered into the darkness to see a familiar face, Jacob Miller, Wade's foreman's son. "Miss Blackett," he whispered. "Mr. Quincy sent me. He can't come himself, there watching for him, but he's working on getting you out." "Jacob, you shouldn't be here," she said, concerned for the boy's safety. "If they catch you, Pa taught me how to move quiet," the boy assured her. "No one saw me. Mr. Quincy wants you to know he's contacted the territorial governor directly. Says the extradition papers are suspicious, the governor never signed them." Hope flared in Lillian's chest. "Forgeries," Jacob nodded. "Mr. Quincy thinks Blackwater bribed someone in the governor's office to fake them. The real governor is sending a telegram to the sheriff first thing tomorrow." "What about Harrington? The federal investigator?" "Gone," Jacob said grimly. "Blackwater's men ambushed him on the road to Cheyenne. He's alive but hurt bad. They took all his papers and samples." Lillian gasped. "That's criminal." "Mr. Quincy says to tell you he's got copies of everything, water samples, testimony, all of it. Harrington was smart, made duplicates before he left." Jacob glanced nervously over his shoulder. "I gotta go. Pa will skin me if he knows I sneaked out." "Wait," Lillian called softly. "Tell Wade I refused Blackwater's deal. He tried to get me to sign a confession in exchange for dropping the charges. Mr. Quincy figured he might try something like that. Says to tell you to hold tight and trust him." The boy hesitated. "Also says to tell you he loves you and he's coming for you no matter what." Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes. "Tell him I love him too, and to be careful Blackwater made threats against him." "We know," Jacob said solemnly. "Pa's got men watching the ranch house tonight. No one'll get to Mr. Quincy without going through them first." After the boy disappeared into the night, Lillian returned to her cot with renewed determination. Wade hadn't abandoned her. He was fighting for her, just as she had fought for him. Together, they might yet overcome Blackwater's schemes. She slept fitfully, awakening at dawn to the sound of horses and voices outside the jailhouse. Rising quickly, she moved to the window but could see nothing from her vantage point. The main door opened, followed by rapid footsteps. Sheriff Mills appeared at her cell, keys in hand. "Miss Blackett, you're being released." "What, why?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Telegram from the territorial governor," Mills explained, unlocking the door. "The extradition papers were forged. There are no charges against you in Massachusetts." Relief flooded through her, quickly followed by suspicion. "Blackwater knows this. He does now," came a familiar voice from the doorway. Wade stood there, trail dust on his clothes and exhaustion etched on his face, but his eyes bright with triumph. Behind him waited Harrington, his arm in a sling but very much alive, and a distinguished-looking man Lillian didn't recognize. "Wade." She rushed to him, propriety forgotten as he enfolded her in his arms. "I told you I'd come for you," he murmured into her hair. The stranger cleared his throat. "Miss Blackett, I'm Judge William Hanson, sent by Governor Thayer to investigate multiple complaints regarding Roland Blackwater and the Blackwater Mining Company." Lillian stepped back from Wade, though she kept hold of his hand. "It's an honor to meet you, Your Honor." "The honor is mine," the judge replied. "Your courage in standing against intimidation is commendable. Mr. Harrington has informed me of the details, including the burning of your schoolhouse and your unjust arrest." "What happens now?" Lillian asked, looking between the judge and Wade. "Now," Wade said with grim satisfaction, "Blackwater faces justice. The governor has ordered his immediate arrest on charges of fraud, witness intimidation, assault on a federal agent, and environmental violations. The sheriff is serving the warrant as we speak." As if on cue, shouting erupted from outside, angry voices, the sound of a scuffle. They moved to the jailhouse door to see Roland Blackwater being forcibly brought down the street by deputies, his face contorted with rage. A crowd had gathered to watch, their expressions a mixture of shock, satisfaction, and confusion. "This is outrageous," Blackwater bellowed upon seeing the judge. "You have no authority here, Hanson. The territorial legislature will hear about this." "They certainly will," Judge Hanson agreed calmly. "Along with detailed reports of your criminal activities. I suggest you save your protests for the courtroom, Mr. Blackwater. You'll need all your energy for your defense." As Blackwater was led past them into the jailhouse, he fixed Wade and Lillian with a venomous glare. "This isn't over, Quincy. Not by a long shot." "Actually, it is over," Wade replied. "Your mining operations are suspended pending environmental review. Your assets are frozen pending investigation of fraud. And your influence in this town," he looked around at the gathered townspeople, "is finished." In that moment, as Blackwater was locked into the same cell that had held Lillian, she felt the balance of power in Snake River shift. Mayor Finch, watching from across the street, suddenly looked older and uncertain. Sheriff Mills stood straighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Ordinary citizens who had feared Blackwater's reach began to speak openly about abuses they had witnessed or experienced. The transformation continued throughout the day as Judge Hanson established a temporary court in the town hall, taking testimony from residents about Blackwater's activities. Lillian provided a detailed account of the burning of the schoolhouse and the subsequent arrest based on forged documents. Wade presented his water samples and documentation of cattle deaths. Miners spoke of unsafe conditions and threats against those who complained. By evening, a clearer picture had emerged of Blackwater's reign of intimidation, a portrait of a man who had used money and fear to control a town and exploit its resources with no regard for the damage caused. As twilight fell, Lillian and Wade walked together along the creek that had been at the center of their conflict with Blackwater. The water flowed clear in the fading light, already beginning to recover now that the mining operations had been suspended. "What happens next?" Lillian asked, her hand in his as they followed the winding path. "Blackwater will face trial," Wade replied. "With the evidence we have and Judge Hanson's determination to see justice done, he'll likely serve time." The mine will probably be sold to new owners who will have to comply with stricter environmental regulations. And Snake River, will it recover? Wade nodded thoughtfully. Towns are resilient like the people in them. Without Blackwater's influence, honest leaders can step forward. The railroad will still come, bringing new opportunities, but on terms that benefit everyone, not just mining interests. And the school. My students need a proper classroom, especially with winter coming. A smile touched Wade's lips. I've been giving that some thought. The old Quincy homestead, my grandfather's original cabin, is sitting empty at the edge of town. With some work, it could be converted into a schoolhouse until a proper one can be rebuilt. That's very generous, Lillian said, touched by his offer. I have selfish motives, he admitted, stopping to face her beside the creek. The sooner the school situation is resolved, the sooner I can properly court Snake River's schoolteacher without causing scandal. Lillian laughed. I think that ship has sailed, Wade Quincy. We've already provided the town with enough gossip to last a decade. Then perhaps we should give them something substantive to talk about, he suggested, his expression growing serious. He took both her hands in his. Lillian Blackett, I love you. These past months have shown me that life is unpredictable and precious. I don't want to waste another day without you by my side. Her breath caught as he dropped to one knee, there beside the creek that had been both the source of their conflict and the catalyst for their connection. Will you marry me, Lillian? Be my wife, my partner, my heart's companion for whatever years were granted. Tears blurred her vision as joy welled up within her. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Wade Quincy, I will marry you. He rose and pulled her into his arms, sealing their promise with a kiss that spoke of love hard-won and deeply cherished. When they finally parted, both breathless, Wade rested his forehead against hers. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered when Caroline died, he murmured. I never expected to find love again, especially not with a stubborn Boston schoolteacher who refused to be intimidated by Roland Blackwater. Lillian smiled through her tears. And I never expected to find my home in a Wyoming mining town with a rancher who values books as much as cattle. They walked back toward town hand in hand, making plans for their future together, the school that would rise from ashes, the ranch that would thrive with clean water flowing through its pastures, the life they would build together. Above them, stars emerged in the vast Wyoming sky, witnesses to promises made and hardships overcome. In the years that followed, Snake River would remember the autumn of 1876 as a turning point when a schoolteacher and a rancher stood against corruption and changed the course of the town's history. The story would be told to children and grandchildren, growing in the telling as all good stories do. But the heart of it would remain true. How they tried to humiliate her in front of the crowd, how the cowboy said, "Then the crowd will watch me fight," and how love and justice prevailed in a small frontier town beneath the endless western sky. Epilogue, Spring 1886. Snake River, Wyoming territory. The schoolyard echoed with children's laughter as Lillian Quincy rang the bell signaling the end of the day. Sunshine bathed the new schoolhouse, a handsome two-story building with large windows and a small bell tower. Built 3 years earlier through community efforts after the original temporary school in the Quincy homestead had become too small for the growing town. Remember, your history essays are due Monday, she called as her students gathered their books and filed out. And don't forget the town celebration tomorrow. 10-year-old James Quincy lingered behind, his gray eyes so like his father's, serious beneath a mop of dark hair. Ma, is Pa still taking me to check the north pasture fence this afternoon? If you finish your chores first, Lillian reminded him with a smile, and look after your sister until I get home. James nodded solemnly. At 10, he considered himself the man of the house when his father was away, a responsibility he took seriously, especially regarding his 7-year-old sister, Charlotte, who had inherited her mother's auburn hair and determined spirit. As the last students departed, Lillian gathered her teaching materials, pausing to straighten a framed newspaper article on the wall. "Blackwater sentenced to 15 years, the headline declared, beneath which was a smaller article announcing the sale of the mining company to Eastern investors committed to modern, safer practices. So much had changed in 10 years. After Blackwater's conviction, Snake River had slowly transformed from a rough mining town, divided by conflict, to a thriving community where ranching, responsible mining, and commerce coexisted. The railroad had arrived as predicted, bringing new opportunities and residents. Wade and Lillian had married in the spring following Blackwater's arrest, a celebration that united the town in a way few had thought possible. They divided their time between the ranch and a comfortable house at the edge of town, allowing Lillian to continue teaching while Wade managed the now prosperous Q Ranch. Their children had been born into a Snake River very different from the one Lillian had first encountered, a town where the creek ran clear, where education was valued, and where the shadow of Roland Blackwater's influence had faded to a cautionary tale. As Lillian walked home through town, she exchanged greetings with shopkeepers and townspeople. Mrs. Peterson, now white-haired but still spry, waved from the porch of her boarding house. Emily, grown now and working as Lillian's teaching assistant, fell into step beside her. "Everything's ready for tomorrow's celebration," Emily reported. "The children have their recitations prepared, and the town council has approved all the arrangements." "Wonderful," Lillian replied. "Hard to believe it's been 10 years since the founding of the public library." The Snake River Public Library had been Wade and Lillian's gift to the town, a substantial stone building housing Wade's extensive book collection, supplemented by donations and new acquisitions. It had become the heart of the community, a place where miners and ranchers alike gathered for reading circles reminiscent of those early gatherings at the Q Ranch. At home, she found Charlotte on the porch swing, deeply engrossed in Little Women, the same copy Sarah Miller had treasured years earlier. Sarah herself had gone east to attend college, returning to Wyoming as one of the territory's first female physicians. "Where's your brother?" Lillian asked, kissing her daughter's forehead. "With Pa," Charlotte replied without looking up from her book. "They left for the North Pasture an hour ago." Lillian smiled, recognizing her own love of reading in her daughter. "Well, put that down long enough to help me with dinner. They'll be hungry when they return." They worked together preparing a meal, Charlotte chattering about school and the upcoming celebration. As they set the table, the sound of horses announced Wade and James's return. Wade entered first, removing his hat and hanging it by the door, a gesture so familiar it made Lillian's heart warm even after 10 years of marriage. At 42, his dark hair was threaded with silver at the temples, and lines fanned from the corners of his eyes, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever known. "There are my girls," he said, crossing the room to kiss Lillian and ruffle Charlotte's hair. "Something smells wonderful." James followed, proudly carrying a toolbox. "Pa let me fix the fence all by myself," he announced. "Supervised," Wade clarified with a wink at Lillian. Dinner was filled with conversation about the day's events: James's fence repair, Charlotte's progress through Little Women, Wade's meeting with the railroad agent about cattle shipments, Lillian's preparations for the library celebration. After the children were in bed, Wade and Lillian sat on the porch swing, watching stars appear in the vast Wyoming sky. His arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him, they enjoyed a moment of quiet in their busy lives. "I received a letter from the governor today," Wade mentioned, his deep voice rumbling beneath her ear. "He's officially submitted Wyoming's application for statehood to Congress." "That's wonderful news," Lillian said. "Do you think it will happen soon?" "Within a few years, they say." "The territory has the population now, and with the mining reforms you helped push through, there are fewer objections from Washington." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You know, when statehood comes, women will retain the right to vote. Wyoming might be the first state where women have full suffrage." Lillian smiled. "The world is changing, Wade. Faster here than back east, perhaps. You changed it," he said simply. "At least our corner of it. Standing up to Blackwater, refusing to be intimidated, you showed this town what courage looks like." "We changed it together," she corrected, turning to face him in the starlight. "You were fighting for what was right long before I arrived." He traced her cheek with gentle fingers. "Do you ever regret it? Coming west? Facing all we did?" "Never," she said without hesitation. "How could I regret the path that led to you, to our children, to this life we've built, even when they tried to humiliate you in front of the crowd?" He asked softly, referring to that long-ago confrontation at the Harvest Festival. She smiled, remembering his words that day, words that had changed both their lives. "Especially then. That was when I knew for certain what kind of man you were." "And what kind is that?" he teased. "The kind who says, 'Then the crowd will watch me fight,' and means it not with fists, but with principle and determination." She leaned forward to kiss him softly. "The kind of man I'm proud to love, Wade Quincy." His arms tightened around her as he deepened the kiss, still capable after a decade of making her heart race and her breath catch. When they finally parted, both were smiling. "I love you, Lillian Blackett Quincy," he murmured, "more with each passing year." "And I love you," she replied. "More than I once believed possible." They sat together in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them, secure in the knowledge that the battles they had fought, the challenges they had overcome, had forged not just a love story but a legacy, a town transformed, children raised with principles, a community built on justice rather than intimidation. In the distance, the creek that had once been at the center of their conflict with Blackwater flowed clean and clear beneath the stars, its waters nourishing the land just as their love nourished each other, and all who knew them in the town of Snake River, Wyoming.